1985, the year where I don't actually remember anything that happened in 1985, but lots of movies did come out that year, and today I'm going to be ranking them. Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1985, or at least the ones that I've seen. And I'm pleased to announce that when I sat down to plan this video, I realised I'd seen 23 films from this particular year, so I didn't really feel the need to do much additional homework over the past week or so. I have watched one additional film to take our total today up to 24. It's a film I've been putting off watching for far too long. I will point out what that film is when we get to it. Just a quick reminder though that the top film today will be going through to our grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. And the film which comes second today may also be joining it in the final, numbers permitting. So let's get into it then. If you've been following this series since the beginning, you'll know exactly how this works. We'll be going from worst to best. So let's begin with the 24th placed and therefore least favourite film of mine, from 1985. So straight away, I can already feel some hate coming through the screen at me, because I know Fright Night is a film which has its fans, but I just wasn't into it the one time I watched it. It didn't help that the day that it came on TV, my dad said to me, "Oh, you've got to watch this film, Fright Night. It's really scary. Oh, you'll really get a kick out of this one." I should have known the minute he said that I wasn't going to enjoy it, and I didn't. I was pretty bored throughout. I was just into more serious horror films at that time. I still am. It's got some good practical effects in it, but apart from that, it just wasn't my thing. My dad was not a horror fan at all, so I struggle to even imagine under what circumstances he would have watched Fright Night, but clearly he did at some point. I did see a trailer for Fright Night 2 once upon a time, which I thought looked pretty good, but given the fact I didn't enjoy the first film, I've no real interest in watching the sequel. I'm not the biggest of Freddy fans, even though I did do a full review series for A Nightmare on Elm Street. Of the films in this franchise that I enjoy, this is not one of them. It's like the people who wrote it didn't even watch the original film. If you interpret the events that happen in this story as being the main character doing the killings himself, and Freddy's just goading him on, then it works a lot better. I did give this a score of 2.5 out of 5, just based on the idea that you can interpret the film that way. But I don't think that was actually the filmmakers' intentions. I just think they made a pretty bad sequel. It's not without its redeeming qualities. I love the bus in the desert stuff, and the main girl in this is really good. I think they should have brought her back, but on the whole, it's not a particularly impressive film. When I was growing up, I saw both Cocoon films a number of times. I do find it hard, though, looking back, to distinguish between the two. They were very samey. It certainly wasn't an idea that needed a sequel. Having said that, I vaguely remember enjoying the second one more, possibly because it had Courtney Cox in it, who added a little bit of glamour to proceedings. On the whole, looking back at both films, it was funny watching these old people develop a spring in their step again. And at the heart of these films, there was an interesting question. Would you, as an old person, choose eternal life on some foreign alien planet, but you wouldn't be able to see your kids and grandkids again? Or would you just let life play out naturally, but you could potentially die in the next 2 or 3 years? I think a lot of people would have different answers to that question. But certainly these were films very much of their time. I've honestly not given Cocoon a second thought in 20 years. This is a horror anthology film featuring 3 different stories, 2 of which were adapted from the Stephen King short story collection Night Shift, those stories being Quitters Inc. and The Ledge. Those are very good stories in written form. I read them just a few years ago. The movie versions in this I've not seen in a long time, and I can barely remember what the third tale is in this. I think it's something to do with a little creature in a child's bedroom or something. Compared to other similar anthologies that came out in the early to mid 80s, things like The Monster Club and Creepshow, I think Cat's Eye is probably superior to those, but I still wouldn't own it, hence why it's come so low today. As I said in my Arnold Schwarzenegger rankings, me and my dad taped this film off the TV when I was growing up because it had Arnie in it and maybe it'll be as good as Conan. The general feeling between the two of us after the movie, though, was that it wasn't actually that good and maybe we could just tape over it with something else and that would be fine. But I would certainly like to reappraise it these days. Same with the Conan films, actually. I need to have myself an Arnold Schwarzenegger swords and sandals, triple bill one weekend, get a load of beers in, watch those two Conan films and Red Sonja. It's been a long, long time since I watched any of them. I don't remember Red Sonja being that good, so I'm very content with it only coming 20th today. But yeah, I'm intrigued just to give it one more watch all these years later. So here we have the next big upset of the day after Fright Night coming bottom, because I know a lot of people adore Rocky 4. I like the Rocky films. I've seen all of them several times. I'll continue to keep watching them for as long as they keep making them. But this fourth film for me is a little bit shallow. If you want to get really analytical about it, it's just Rocky coming back again and fighting another bloke who's a little bit taller than the previous bloke he fought, and we get to see Apollo die. Oh joy. Now, I know that there's going to be a new cut of this, which I think is coming out later this year. Sylvester Stallone has been working on a new cut of the movie, which I think he's going to call Rocky versus Drago or something. I don't know if the changes are going to be quite small and therefore relatively insignificant when it comes to reviewing the film, or whether it's going to feel like a completely different cut. So if I did this rankings this time next year, who knows, maybe I would do it with a completely different view of Rocky 4 and it would have come a lot higher, but the chips land where they do, and I'm afraid in its current form, Rocky 4 is only my 19th film on the list today. You know how some people look back with reverence at It's a Wonderful Life as being this magnificent Christmas film which will never be beaten? For me, Santa Claus the movie is my It's a Wonderful Life. I guess for my own kids, it would be the Polar Express, different eras, you know. But back in the 80s, Santa Claus the movie was a top film for any kid to watch at Christmas. I always used to feel really sorry for the homeless kid, Joe. It's cool how the little girl in this looks after him, and in the end they become sort of stepbrother and stepsister, I think. Dudley Moore plays the naughty elf, of course. I think if the film was made these days, that role would be played by Tom Hiddleston, maybe doing it a lot like Loki. And when I think of that scene near the end where Santa's sleigh does the loop-de-loop, I can still feel the wind on my face from being sat in the living room watching it. I'm currently in the middle of a Friday the 13th review series. I've done the first 6 films so far, and in my opinion, this is by far the weakest of those first 6 films. And I don't say that because Jason's not in it. All the misgivings I have about part 5 are mostly unrelated to the fact that Roy is the killer, but go and check out my full review if you want to hear me talk about the film at length. It was only about 10 videos ago that I put that out. But certainly there was never any danger of Friday Part 5 going through to the grand final like the original film did. So here we are at the film I've just got done watching for the first time. I've been hearing for some time that Return of the Living Dead and a few of its sequels are really worth watching, and I would have to agree because I had a really good time with this. I usually prefer more grim, darker zombie films, but I laughed a few times during this film. I especially enjoyed the joke where the zombie gets on the police radio and says, "Send more cops." And I love the tar zombie in this. He might already be my favourite zombie of all time. And that's quite an accolade for this film to win, given the sheer volume of zombie films that I have seen during my lifetime. On the downside, some of the scenes, especially the dialogue-heavy ones, do drag on a bit long, and I don't think some of the characters in this are as funny or as endearing as the film thinks that they are. But maybe at some point I'll do a full review for this film and its sequels. But for today, I think 16th is a good placing, given the fact that I've only just watched it for the first time. Brains! When I was a kid, I always enjoyed playing the Cluedo board game. I believe in America it was called Clue, just like this movie. My favourite character was always Colonel Mustard, I think because I actually enjoy eating mustard. Weird, I know. My favourite weapon was always the handgun because it was just the most badass weapon. And my favourite room, was there a billiards room? If so, it would have been that because I've always enjoyed snooker. In the UK, we had a TV show based on the game. I think it only ran for about one season, but it was a lot of fun every week watching these same actors and actresses in a completely different mystery. And then, of course, we had the movie, which would have come before the TV show, I think, and it was a lot of fun. It had about 3 different endings that all followed on from each other. So just when you thought you had the whole thing figured out, they hit you with a different ending. I think Tim Curry plays a butler in it. And I believe that there is a remake in the works, although it's one of those films that has sort of been in development hell for like, quite a few years. So whether it will actually happen, I don't know. When that film came out a couple of years ago, I forget what it's called. It's the one with Daniel Craig where he plays this detective with a Texan accent. I can't remember the name of the film, but when I was watching that in the cinema, I was actually reminded of Clue, this film from 1985. It does have a few kind of similar characteristics to it. Coming into this video, I had the same problem with the Fletch films as I did with the Cocoon ones, in that it's a 2-film series and my memory couldn't quite remember what happens in each one. It all just kind of blurs into one. But if I was to rewatch Fletch today, or its sequel, Fletch Lives, I would at least think that a sequel was justified for this, unlike Cocoon, because each Fletch film is just its own little separate mystery. There could be 10 Fletch films and that would be fine. And I think they're actually going to make another one all these years later. It's not going to have Chevy Chase in it. I believe it's going to be called Fletch Lives, which is a bit of a silly title if Chevy Chase is not actually in it. But he's always been a favourite actor of mine, especially because of the stuff that he did back in his pomp. I absolutely love Caddyshack. He's just got one of those expressions where even if he's not saying anything, he's just stood there with a fairly neutral expression. He could have the merest trace of a smile and I would already be grinning. Bill Murray has the exact same effect on me. Reputedly the weakest of the Mad Max trilogy, and although I would agree with that, I do think that this film is quite close to the first two in terms of quality. It's got a great chase at the end. I think the stuff to do with the kids is not as Spielbergy as it could have been. There's that one scene where the kid literally gets swallowed up by the desert. It's quite dark. Speaking of the desert, I like how it's a lot more sand duney in this one, whereas in the second film the sand felt quite flat. It's as if in the world of Mad Max, with the more time that passes, Australia is getting more and more covered in sand somehow, as if humans are slowly burying themselves. There's probably no logic in me thinking that. One thing that's always confused me about this film is the Bruce Spence character, the gyro pilot. Him and Max don't really seem to speak in this, unless Bruce Spence is playing a completely different character, which is just confusing. There could have been a few years that have passed between number 2 and number 3, so maybe they just don't recognise each other very well. I don't know. It's a little bit similar to the third film in the Dollars trilogy, where Lee Van Cleef's Colonel character is sort of maybe the character from the second film, or maybe he isn't. I've never been sure about that one either. If you've not seen this, it would be easy to look at the cast list and think to yourself, well, none of the original actors have come back. This is probably going to be one of those naff sequels that's not worth my time. But nothing could be further from the truth. I've seen this only the one time, but I really enjoyed it. Richard Burton was actually meant to come back. He signed on to do this, but he died just before production. Scott Glenn is in it, though. He went on to play Clarice's boss in Silence of the Lambs. From memory, he seems a lot younger in this, even though I think this only came out 5 or 6 years before Silence of the Lambs. Wild Geese 2 is more of a Euro thriller than the first one, which took place mostly in Africa, but it's a solid, well-made action espionage film. It's pretty good, actually. I've got warm memories of this one because when I was about 12, it was the start of the 2-week Easter holidays, I think. I had nothing to do, nothing planned, but my dad randomly came home with a copy of Code of Silence that I think he borrowed off a friend and just dumped it down So I watched this on the first day of my holidays. It was like 11 a.m. in the morning. It was a strange time of the day to be watching Chuck Norris shooting people, but I had a really good time. This is probably one of Chuck Norris's best films. He plays a cop taking down these drug gangs. It's your typical brainless 80s action hero fun, but it's not my absolute favourite Chuck Norris film. We will come to that one in the course of time. So into the top 10 we go with yet another one of those numbskull action films of which I am so very fond of. Death Wish 3 was the final one in the franchise to be directed by Michael Winner. It's also the point where I think all remaining story credibility goes out of the window. I mean, how many of Paul Kersey's lovers slash friends slash relatives can be raped or mugged just so he can step in and save the day? At times, the second half of this film feels like a video game shoot 'em up, but it's a lot of fun. I think the final kill is made with a rocket launcher, which just about sums things up, but I must stress it's a lot of fun to watch. And let me tell you, there is a Blu-ray collection of Death Wish, which has been in my eBay basket for a little while now, just staring at me saying, buy me, buy me. And I think very soon I probably will. So here is one of those dark and grim zombie films I was referring to earlier. This is the third of 6 George Romero films to come out chronologically. It is a little bit underwhelming the first time you watch it if you come to it from Dawn of the Dead, but certainly I found it to be a film which improves with age. It's very bleak and oppressive. I mean, a lot of the action takes place underground. You can feel the depression and anxiety weighing down the protagonists in this. There's a great bad guy as well. I forget his name, but he gives this incredible speech in a diner. He says something like, I'm in charge of this monkey farm now. It's absolutely, you just can't take your eyes off this guy when he's speaking, and he's one scary bastard. There's some great gore effects towards the end of this, and I would definitely consider it to be a minor classic of the genre. This is one which I don't believe has the greatest of reputations, but that surprises me because I have always loved this since I was a kid. I've seen it 6 or 7 times. Yes, it's an Indiana Jones rip-off, and it's probably a little bit more tongue-in-cheek than your standard Indiana Jones film, but I think the indie film that it's most aligned to in terms of its content is probably Temple of Doom, which is great for me because Temple of Doom might just be my favourite Indiana Jones film. There's a scene in King Solomon's Mines involving a giant spider, which always used to freak me out. I mean, as a kid, I would have goosebumps on my arm for a good half an hour leading up to this scene. And I think one time I watched it, they actually cut that scene out. I guess they recognised that it was a little bit too terrifying for middle of the afternoon viewing. Even now, at 40 years old, I'm pretty sure that if I watch the film, and this is probably the longest I've gone without seeing it, I would still kind of be a bit nervous in the build up to that spider cave. There is a sequel to this, but I don't think I've ever seen it, which is weird because the first one, like I said, I've seen it numerous times, but I have no memory of a second film. So maybe it's just the case that TV used to show the first one and not the second one. To survive a war, you gotta become war. Rambo 2 has no extra value as a story because everything was wrapped up neatly with the first movie, but seeing him come back and just shooting 100 different guys in Vietnam is so much fun. And as bad as it makes me sound, I do actually prefer this one to the first one. I'm certain that I've given this a higher ranking than I did First Blood Part 1. I mean, you've got guys dying from explosive tipped arrows, you've got fights on helicopters, shootouts on boats. There's Steven Berkoff hamming it up as this Russian general guy. It's so much fun. I mean, Rambo 2 is just 90 minutes of pure adrenaline, and I absolutely love it. The only thing I don't like is the fact that his new girlfriend dies after about 5 minutes. I think that was a little bit unnecessary. I don't think he really needed the extra impetus to get the job done in this film, but that's just a little thing. So yeah, Rambo 2 is a good one for me. I only realised when putting this video together that Jewel in the Nile came out just 1 year after Romancing the Stone. I would have presumed from watching these films that Romancing the Stone was something like 85 and Jewel in the Nile would have been something like 88 or 89. But this is a good follow-up to the original. It's still a lot of fun watching Kathleen Turner and Michael Douglas going on adventures together. Danny DeVito, I think, is more watchable in this than in the first one because he's a fully fledged good guy now, and he's probably the most tolerable in this that I've ever seen him, because I'm not normally a Danny DeVito fan, but he's good fun in Jewel in the Nile. We get a good change in location. The first film was mostly in the jungles of Colombia. This time around, we're in a desert. We're a pretty decent bad guy, and if you enjoyed Romancing the Stone, there's no reason not to watch this as well, because if there is a downgrade in quality from the first film, it's oh so very slight. John, I ain't going to shoot you between the eyes. I'm going to shoot you between the balls. I love Commando. It seems like there's been so many action films in this ranking now that I think about it. We've had a Rambo film, we've had a Death Wish film, we've had a Chuck Norris film. I think 1985 might just be the centre of the action star universe somehow, but this is the best of the bunch. I've watched this film since I was a kid in the 80s. The shootout in the last 20 minutes is absolutely awesome. It's like Operation Wolf come to life. All these bad guys just going and dying to Arnie's machine guns and stuff. But the film's great up until then as well. So many memorable bad guys, like the one he drops off the cliff. And then there's the fight with Bill Duke in the hotel room. It's absolutely marvellous. The fight with Bennett at the end, it's just amazing. A funny story about this film, in the UK, they always used to cut out the bit where Arnie takes refuge in the shed during the big shootout near the end. And when some guy told me about this shed scene, I didn't believe him. I was like, are you even talking about the same movie? And then when I finally got the film on DVD in my 20s, I saw that the shed scene was actually a real thing. And I was like, whoa, this is great, like 5 extra kills. But honestly, I love a bit of Commando. It's wonderful. It hasn't been much of a ranking for horror films, but this is the highest ranked one today. Demons is a film about a group of people who get trapped in a cinema, and demons get in and start to turn the humans into more demons one by one. It's got a great soundtrack, great final girl, some really impressive practical effects, the sort that you just don't get anymore. Some good characters, and it's just got a great atmosphere. I love this film. The first time I watched it was in geography class back in high school, improbably, because this kid brought it in on the last day of term. We were allowed to watch a video, and he put it on just as the teacher was walking out of the room, and so the teacher didn't actually see what we were watching. If he had, he probably would have told us to turn it off. As it is, we got to watch at least an hour of it before the bell rang for next lesson. Kind of weird start to my life as a fan of this movie, but it's really good, this, if you're into horror films. And it's not a zombie film, but it sort of plays out a little bit like a zombie film, I guess, but it's really cool. I think this is the second Bond film in a row which has come third, therefore just missing out on the grand final. I think Octopussy suffered the same fate, so Roger Moore's probably rolling in his grave right now, but we do at least have The Spy Who Loved Me through to the grand final. I probably like A View to a Kill more than most people because it came out at a time when I was just getting into Bond as a kid. I distinctly remember being in the care of my much older cousin one day, and we went into a video store and there were like 40 copies of A View to a Kill on the wall because it was the big new thing that had just come out on home video, and I've loved it ever since. It doesn't bother me that Roger Moore is so old in this one. I don't think it affects the movie. I've been a member of various Bond forums over the years, and I've heard loads of criticism about Stacey Sutton and how she's not a good character, but I really like her. You know what? In the year that Tanya Roberts has passed away, I will stick up for Stacey Sutton. I get a little bit tired of all the newer Bond films constantly having Bond girls who are Bond's equal. You know, there's nothing wrong with a Bond girl just being a normal person thrust into an adventure that they didn't expect. In this case, Stacey Sutton is a geologist. I mean, she's not stupid. She's just very uncomfortable in a burning elevator, as would most people. And like most people, she would not be very good up against a psychopath like Zorin. I would probably be exactly the same. So I quite like Stacey Sutton. I like A View to a Kill. The stuff on the the Golden Gate Bridge at the end is probably one of the best ever endings to a Bond film. I love the moment where Mayday comes out of the tunnel and you see Zorin's face. I mean, it's a better moment than the moment where Zorin actually dies for me. And I love the song in this. I think, is it actually called A View to a Kill, or is it called Dance into the Fire or something like that? But when I was at uni, I actually almost sang this in karaoke. Me and a friend were going to duet it together. And we sat there nervously for about 20 minutes waiting for our turn, furiously drinking more beer. But then the karaoke machine went on the fritz, so we never actually got to do it, which was a shame. Lorraine, you're my density. I mean, my destiny. I went to see Back to the Future at the cinema when I was 5. I'd never even heard of it on the night that my mum and dad took me to see it. I asked my dad what we were going to see, and he said Back to the Future. And just from the title alone, I got no excitement at all. But once we got there, I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure I would have understood the whole plot at that age, but certainly throughout the rest of the 80s and the 90s, we watched the whole trilogy in our household every single year. It was Christmas 93, Christmas Day 93, that they showed the third film on TV for the first time. I remember on Christmas morning, we were getting in a flap trying to set up the VCR player so that it would tape it, because we were going off to my aunt's to have Christmas dinner, so we wouldn't be there in person to press record. And I think we messed it up, but at some point we managed to get it taped. In terms of the first movie, I don't think there's ever been a film as well cast as this one. I mean, if you think of all the characters, Marty, George, Biff, Lorraine, and Doc, I mean, they're just played by the most perfect actors in every single case. It's such a funny film. It's a good family adventure. I absolutely love Back to the Future. I'm not sure if this would be my favourite of the trilogy, because number 2 is really, really top draw stuff. But certainly I'm very happy to put this one through to the grand final. But there is one film that came out in 1985 I like even more than Back to the Future. Let's find out what that is. $50 bills! $50 bills! You guys, we have the money to pay. I don't know why I'm so quote happy today, but again, this is another movie I've loved since I was a kid. My brother loved it as well. My brother's 4 years younger than me, but we bonded so much over this film. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that I've probably seen the Goonies 30, 40 times across my lifetime. It's just the perfect adventure film. I wouldn't change an inch of it, and possibly it's the first horror film I ever saw. I mean, could you call this a young adult horror film? Maybe. I don't think that's too much of a stretch. But I love the traps in the caves. You've got that amazing moment where they see the pirate ship for the first time. It's such a great set. That bit where they go down the water slides, I used to watch that and think, oh, I'd love to do that myself, you know. So yeah, The Goonies is a worthy number 1, and it's a film which has always made me want to go and live in Astoria. I mean, if you asked most Brits where they would live if they were to move to America, most people would say, oh, well, Miami, maybe New York. But high on my list would be Oregon, just because of how cool the place looks in this film. Although if I was to buy a house in Astoria, I would definitely double check that Troy's dad would not be planning to build any golf courses in the area. Yes, despite the fact that this was a very long rankings, I do have a little list of films from 85 I would still like to see at some point. One of those is Pale Rider, a Clint Eastwood Western. Another one is a film called Phenomena, which I believe might be a Dario Argento Italian horror film that I've not yet seen. There's a film called Subway, which is some kind of Euro action film, which I'd never heard of until about a week ago, and it just caught my eye on Wikipedia, and I actually looked for it to possibly rent on Prime, and it's just not on there. Then we've got a film called The Mutilator, which is just one of those slasher films from the sort of latter part of the Golden Generation era. I'm not sure if it's any good, but certainly I'd like to give it a watch at some point. And I've also written down Missing in Action 2, which is a Chuck Norris film, but I've not even seen Missing in Action 1, but talking about Chuck Norris films in some of these rankings has made me realise that I've not actually watched any Chuck Norris films in a long, long time, and so why not watch some of the ones I've not seen at some point. I didn't know he'd done 2 missing in action films. Apparently he has. Right, we'll wrap it up for today. We've got the Goonies and Back to the Future going through to the final. I will be back soon with a rankings for 1986. Until next time, bye-bye.